They never expect to wake up with thoughts of you completely filling their mind. This is the first important thing you need to understand. Most people are not prepared to face what they have buried deep inside, using all their strength and determination over a long period of time. The intensity had already taken hold of them, because staying indifferent works quietly, in a subtle way that is difficult to recognize at first. But this situation was never truly silent. It became a battle they had been losing, even while their eyes remained closed, and the world around them appeared perfectly calm on the surface. You sensed it yourself, didn't you? There was that small shift, that hidden current of energy, as though something extremely important was growing beneath their calm and steady exterior. It was never really about distance or uncertainty. It was something far more serious than that. It involved a genuine recognition of what was happening inside them, without room for doubt. If you want the complete truth about how someone secretly struggles against powerful feelings for you, understand this clearly. People rarely welcome their emotions when those feelings first begin to surface. Instead, they push them away, question them from every possible angle, and search for reasons to dismiss them. They hide those emotions behind logic, pride, and the walls they have carefully built over many years. Because what they feel for you does not fit the image of themselves they work so hard to maintain every single day. This inner conflict is where things become dangerous and deeply challenging. The more a feeling threatens their pride, the more aggressively they try to suppress it. This process is what psychologists such as Freud described as repression, the mind's tendency to hide desires that feel unacceptable or uncomfortable. Yet repression is not simply forgetting. It creates pressure that continues to build beneath the surface. And pressure always finds a way out eventually, no matter how firmly someone tries to contain it. Most people do not realize this until much later. What they refuse to acknowledge yesterday gradually becomes the force influencing their thoughts and behavior today. That is exactly why this morning felt different from every other ordinary day. It was not because something new suddenly appeared. It happened because something finally gave way inside them. And you were not there to witness that deeply private collapse of denial. This hidden breakdown was never a spoken confession or a direct message. It was the moment when every escape route they relied upon stopped working. Comment awakened if you have ever been the person someone could not stop thinking about during those quiet morning hours. In that silence, their usual distractions disappeared, and you emerged not merely as a memory, but as an undeniable realization. Attraction can be ignored, curiosity can be dismissed, but when something carries genuine emotional weight, the mind begins to fracture under the strain. They were forced to confront a question they had avoided for far too long. Why do you affect them so deeply? They attempted to answer with pure logic, convincing themselves that the feeling was temporary and ultimately insignificant. They used every explanation available: coincidence, chemistry, timing, circumstances. They clung to anything except the truth they feared most. The reality is simple. You do not spend your energy explaining away something that means nothing to you. You do not fight against something that does not exist, and you do not bury feelings that have no depth. Every effort they made to remove you from their thoughts only made your presence more vivid. Every distraction they relied on failed at the exact moment they needed it most. This is not weakness. It is the unavoidable pull of something real. They did not want something they could not fully control. They wanted complete authority over their emotions, reactions, and choices. Then you arrived and disrupted that carefully maintained balance. You became the one variable they could not predict. You became the emotion they could not calculate and the presence they could not erase, regardless of how determined they were to do so. That loss of control is what truly frightened them. It was never entirely about you. It was about what your presence awakened within them. You did not simply create a small ripple in their life. You brought something to the surface that had been sleeping inside them for a very long time. And people rarely fear emotions themselves. They fear losing control over who they believe they are. That explains why they suddenly pulled away and why their behavior became inconsistent. Their energy seemed scattered, not because they cared too little, but because they felt more than they could comfortably handle. Feeling this deeply demands a decision, and they were not ready to make one. Avoidance is not proof that desire is absent. It is proof that the desire is strong enough to create an internal war. Their conscious mind instructed them to remain safe behind logic and caution, while their subconscious continued bringing you back. It reconstructed your presence during moments of stillness, exactly where their distractions no longer worked. They began noticing that you were not fading from their mind with time. Instead, your image became clearer, sharper, harder to ignore. Denial requires distance and space to survive, yet your influence continued growing stronger, even without physical closeness. Once a feeling moves beyond uncertainty and settles into subconscious certainty, it no longer asks for permission. It demands attention. That turning point arrived for them this morning in a quiet but powerful way, stripped of every comfort they once relied upon. Type-breaking if you understand what it feels like when denial collapses without dramatic chaos or loud conflict. It arrived as a silent wave that overwhelmed them completely. Their walls did not collapse because of an outside force. They crumbled under the weight of what had been hidden within. Yet the experience shook them more deeply than any spoken confession ever could. Because the truth was not spoken aloud, it was simply understood. And understanding at that level changes everything. You can deceive other people. You can even deceive yourself for a while. But once the mind truly accepts something important, it rarely lets go of that knowledge. They now understand the truth completely. Not partially, not vaguely, not with uncertainty. Acceptance, however, does not instantly bring peace. In many ways, it creates a new form of chaos. Now they must face everything they spent so much time avoiding. They must consider what these feelings actually mean. They must think about how those feelings could reshape their future. They must decide what those emotions require from them. Most importantly, they must confront what they stand to lose if they continue pretending none of this matters. That is where the real challenge begins. Because denial is exhausting, but acceptance demands responsibility. The moment someone admits the truth to themselves, they can no longer hide behind uncertainty. They can no longer claim they do not know what they feel. They can no longer convince themselves that time alone will solve everything. The truth remains present, waiting for a response. And that response becomes impossible to avoid forever. Part of them still wants to retreat. Part of them still wants to return to the familiar comfort of emotional distance. Yet another part knows that returning is no longer possible. Something has changed permanently. The version of themselves that could ignore these feelings is slowly disappearing. That realization carries enormous weight. It forces them to examine every decision they have made, every moment they pulled away, every opportunity they allowed to pass, every excuse they used to justify their silence. What once seemed reasonable now feels incomplete. What once felt safe now feels limiting. And what once appeared simple now feels impossible to dismiss. This is why their thoughts continue returning to you, not because they are trying to create the feeling, not because they are intentionally encouraging it, but because the feeling has become impossible to ignore. Their mind keeps circling back to the same conclusion. You matter. Far more than they originally wanted to admit. Far more than they planned. Far more than they expected. And every attempt to reduce that truth only makes it more obvious. There comes a point when resistance becomes more painful than honesty. A point where maintaining emotional distance requires more energy than acknowledging what is real. They are approaching that point now. Perhaps they have already reached it. The struggle is no longer about whether the feeling exists. That question has already been answered. The struggle is about what happens next. Do they continue hiding? Do they continue waiting? Do they continue convincing themselves that avoidance is protection? Or do they finally accept that some connections enter your life for a reason and refuse to disappear regardless of how hard you try to push them away? These are the questions standing in front of them now. And unlike before, they can no longer pretend those questions do not exist. Because every morning brings the same realization. Every quiet moment brings the same awareness. Every attempt to move past it leads back to the same place. You. Not as a passing thought, not as a temporary distraction, but as a truth they have finally begun to recognize. And once that recognition becomes complete, everything changes. The walls become weaker. The excuses become less convincing. The distance becomes harder to maintain. And the future they once imagined without you begins to feel very different from the future they secretly wish for now. That is why this moment matters so much. Not because it guarantees immediate action, not because it promises instant answers, but because the truth has finally surfaced. And once the truth reaches the surface, it becomes remarkably difficult to bury again. No matter how much effort is used, no matter how much time passes, no matter how strongly someone wishes things could return to the way they were before. Some realizations change everything, and this is one of them. Feelings of this intensity rarely remain neutral for very long. They continue to grow, gain strength, and move forward with a steady momentum that becomes increasingly difficult to stop. Right now, they are standing at the edge of all that accumulated pressure, trying to maintain their sense of control, while everything beneath the surface continues shifting and transforming. What once felt stable now feels uncertain, and what once seemed manageable is becoming harder to contain. This experience was never solely about you as an individual in their life. More than anything, it has been about the deeper parts of themselves that your presence awakened. Certain emotions, desires, and truths that had remained dormant for years have suddenly come into focus, demanding attention in ways they never expected. That process of inner awakening is still unfolding. It has not reached its conclusion, and in many ways, it is only beginning to reveal its full impact. They once believed that accepting their feelings would make everything quieter and easier to handle. They were wrong. Admitting the truth did not calm the storm inside them. It simply gave the storm a name. And once something important has a name, it becomes much harder to avoid, deny, or escape. Awareness does not reduce emotional intensity. If anything, it sharpens it. What was once vague and uncertain becomes clear and undeniable. What was once hidden beneath layers of doubt becomes a reality that demands recognition. That new reality began pressing against them almost immediately. They can no longer convince themselves that nothing is happening. They can no longer rely on the hope that everything will simply disappear on its own with enough time and distance. Every thought now carries greater meaning. Every memory feels more significant. Every quiet moment seems charged with emotion and tension that refuses to fade. When the mind loses its ability to deny something real, it naturally begins to split into opposing directions. One part moves toward you. The other part fights desperately to move away. Neither side wants to surrender, and neither side appears willing to give up the struggle anytime soon. This is not ordinary confusion. It is a genuine internal conflict between desire and self-protection. Both forces are growing stronger, because what they feel for you has moved beyond simple attraction. It is beginning to resemble something deeper, something that carries the weight of emotional attachment. Attachment feels threatening to anyone who fears losing control over their life, choices, or carefully maintained independence. Most people never recognize this process while it is happening. The stronger the emotional current becomes, the stronger their defenses rise in response. That is why recognizing their feelings did not immediately inspire action. Instead, they paused. They thought too much. They analyzed everything repeatedly, from every possible angle. Simple things that once felt effortless suddenly became complicated. Every interaction carried more meaning. Every possibility seemed connected to risk. Every decision appeared larger than it actually was. Anything that carries genuine importance often feels dangerous to someone who values control. It can feel threatening to their freedom, threatening to their identity, threatening to the image they have spent years building and protecting. After all, people do not fear things they truly do not care about. And that truth creates a contradiction they can no longer ignore. The same feeling pulling them closer is also pushing them away. The same connection bringing comfort is creating fear. The same desire creating hope is awakening uncertainty. This contradiction follows them everywhere. It drains energy, it occupies attention, and it quietly influences moments that once felt completely ordinary. What used to be a normal day now carries a subtle reminder of you. Even when you are not directly involved, there is an echo of your presence lingering in the background of their thoughts. Comment pressure if you have ever sensed someone trying to suppress powerful feelings for you. Sometimes, all it takes is a familiar tone of voice, a brief pause, a certain memory, a specific silence, and suddenly their thoughts return to you again. The subconscious mind does not follow schedules or timelines. It holds on to meaningful experiences long after the conscious mind wants to move on. You have crossed an important threshold within them. You are no longer something optional in their emotional world. That realization forces them to confront a question they have avoided for a long time. Why you? Out of everyone they have met, why does your presence affect them in such a unique and powerful way? Why does this connection feel different? Why does it continue growing instead of fading? The harder they search for logical explanations, the less satisfying those explanations become. Because this connection was never built solely on convenience or circumstance. It cannot be reduced to a single reason. It cannot be explained away with a simple story. Its roots run deeper than that. It comes from a sense of recognition that feels both unexpected and impossible to ignore. And if this connection is truly real, then it demands something from them. It requires openness, it requires honesty, it requires action. Most of all, it requires vulnerability. Those are things they have spent years avoiding. So they delay. They create more distance. They search for reasons to slow down what is already accelerating within them. Yet distance does not weaken a genuine emotional bond. Very often, it strengthens it. Distance removes distractions. It removes noise. It removes all the things that once helped them avoid the truth. And when those distractions disappear, only what is real remains. That truth is becoming louder, not quieter, stronger, not weaker. They feel this change every time their thoughts drift back to you without warning. They feel it in unexpected emotions that surface during ordinary moments. They feel it whenever something inside refuses to settle, no matter how much effort they invest in controlling it. Suppression keeps failing, again and again. The tension is becoming impossible to ignore because they are fully aware of their feelings while still resisting them. They sense the truth, yet continue questioning it. They recognize its power, yet hesitate to carry its full weight. This creates a constant psychological pressure that never completely disappears. Instead, it keeps building, growing tighter, growing heavier, until eventually something must give way under the strain. They are not only struggling with the feelings themselves, they are struggling with what those feelings reveal. Because what they feel for you exposes needs and fears they have tried to keep hidden. It reveals a deep desire for connection, a longing to be understood, a wish to be seen clearly by another person. And alongside those desires comes the fear of being affected so profoundly. To be affected deeply means becoming vulnerable. And vulnerability requires surrendering a degree of control. That is where much of their discomfort comes from. Part of them wants closeness. Another part wants safety. As a result, they keep moving back and forth. One moment they lean closer emotionally, the next moment they pull away mentally. One moment they imagine hopeful possibilities, The next, they convince themselves it is too complicated, too risky, or too uncertain. This pattern is not random, it serves a purpose. It acts as a protective mechanism. It allows them to experience the feelings gradually without fully surrendering to them all at once. Yet something this meaningful cannot be experienced halfway forever. It eventually asks for a decision. You can postpone facing it, you can delay it, you can distract yourself from it. But sooner or later, reality demands acknowledgement. And every delay carries a cost. Suppressed emotions do not disappear. They transform. They become tension. They become restlessness. They become mental noise that follows someone everywhere. Recently, that noise has become much louder for them, more persistent, more difficult to silence. It is beginning to affect not only their emotions, but also their thinking patterns, daily habits, and overall behavior. Sometimes it shows itself through reduced focus. Sometimes through changing moods. Sometimes through unexpected reactions to situations that have nothing to do with you directly. Yet beneath those reactions lies the same source, a truth that continues demanding recognition, a feeling that refuses to fade, and a connection that has become far more significant than they ever intended it to be. The more they try to contain it, the more obvious its presence becomes. The more they resist it, the more energy that resistance requires. And the more clearly they see the truth, the harder it becomes to return to the version of themselves that existed before these feelings fully emerged. That is the position they find themselves in now, caught between holding on and letting go, between caution and honesty, between fear and desire. And every passing day brings them closer to the moment when one side finally becomes stronger than the other. An unresolved truth is suddenly rising from deep within them, demanding attention and asking for something they are not completely ready to offer without hesitation. Type yes if you want to understand how their subconscious mind keeps pulling them back toward you. They are much closer to their personal breaking point than they currently realize or want to admit. At this moment, something important is beginning to crack open inside them. Not on the outside, where they maintain a calm appearance through habit and effort each day. The real transformation is taking place beneath the surface, where the mind stops pretending and where truth exists without needing anyone's approval. Repression always comes with a hidden price, and that price is finally becoming due. The longer someone pushes down something genuine, the stronger it returns later, often with much greater force than before. What once felt manageable now feels intrusive and impossible to ignore. What once seemed distant now feels immediate and close. What could be denied before now feels completely undeniable within their heart. When the subconscious can no longer remain contained, it does not negotiate gently. It breaks through unexpectedly in raw, direct and powerful ways they never anticipated. It shows itself in sudden emotional reactions, increased irritability, and moments where small issues trigger frustration far beyond what the situation actually deserves. Their ability to focus begins slipping away the moment thoughts of you enter their mind without warning. You are no longer simply another person existing somewhere in their outer world. You have become part of their private inner reality. And that distinction changes everything. External things can be avoided. They can be set aside. They can be replaced. But internal realities travel with a person everywhere they go. They follow them into quiet moments, into restless nights, into spaces they once believed belonged only to themselves. Their resistance is beginning to weaken because the central question has changed. It is no longer about whether they feel something real. That answer has already become clear. The new question is what they are going to do about these feelings that refuse to disappear. And that question frightens them more than anything else. Because taking action requires exposure. It requires vulnerability. It requires surrendering a degree of control they have spent years protecting. Most people spend their lives trying to avoid exactly this type of situation. You cannot completely control something that has already changed you from within. and you have changed them in ways that reach much deeper than they expected. This change is not superficial. It is not temporary. It has affected the way they understand emotions, the way they experience connection, the way they interpret absence, and the way they think about relationships altogether. Your absence has become louder than your presence ever was. That reality is what slowly breaks through their defenses. It is not simply missing you, it is feeling your influence regardless of where they are or what they are doing. That creates a tension that refuses to fade. It returns again and again in repeating cycles, and each time it comes back, it feels stronger than before. Every attempt to move forward eventually brings them back to the same realization. Nothing else feels quite the same. Nothing else creates the same impact. Nothing else carries the same emotional weight. That quiet comparison is gradually wearing down the walls they built for protection. Everything else begins to feel less intense, less meaningful, less authentic, less alive. And that comparison forces them to face a truth they spent a long time avoiding. This connection cannot simply be replaced. It cannot be exchanged for something easier. It cannot be forgotten through effort alone. Share this if you have ever been the one they tried to forget, but never truly could. A quiet sense of panic is slowly growing inside them. Not dramatic panic, not something obvious to others, but a slow, steady awareness moving forward day by day. If something cannot be replaced, then losing it becomes a frightening possibility. And the fear of losing something genuine is often far stronger than the fear of never having it at all. Their behavior is beginning to shift in ways they do not fully understand. At times, they become unpredictable. At other times, they move between sudden impulses and extreme restraint without any clear pattern. One side of them wants to move closer, to face the truth, to end the tension, to quiet the constant noise in their mind. Yet another side, stronger and more conditioned by years of self-protection, tells them to remain cautious, to stay safe, to avoid anything that feels overwhelming. This ongoing battle is exhausting them. Neither side is willing to release its hold without resistance. The pressure continues building because this struggle has moved beyond simple emotions. It now touches deeper questions about identity, about authenticity, about who they truly are compared to who they present themselves to be. The version of themselves that avoids you cannot exist forever alongside the version that feels you so strongly. Eventually, one side must give way. One side must make room for the other. They are finally beginning to recognize their own repeating patterns more clearly than ever before. Now they catch themselves reaching for distractions whenever something gets too close to the truth. Now they notice the moments they pull away. Now they see the habits they once justified without question. This growing self-awareness feels deeply uncomfortable.